Something satisfies you recently. Not in the usual way, not the way a good meal or a warm bed satisfies you. Something quieter than that, and far more unsettling. You wake up in the morning and for a few seconds, maybe 3 or 4, you don't remember who you are. Not in a dramatic way, not amnesia. Just this brief floating gap where the life you've built, the name people call you, the job you go to, the face you wear, none of it has landed yet. And in that gap, there's a strange kind of freedom. But then it all rushes back. The identity, the obligations, the low hum of anxiety that has become so familiar you barely notice it anymore. You swing your legs over the side of the bed and you think, without quite putting it into words, something is wrong with me. I want to stop you right there. Because that feeling, that quiet gnawing sense that something is off, that the life you're living doesn't quite fit, that you're somehow standing in someone else's shoes and pretending they're yours, that is not a malfunction. It's not depression, though it can look like it. It's not laziness, though people might label it that. And it is absolutely not a sign that you are broken. It is something far more interesting than that. It is the sound of your real self knocking on a door you locked a long time ago. I've spent years studying the work of Carl Jung, not in the way you study for an exam, but in the way you study something that saved your life. And one of the things Jung understood better than almost anyone who has ever lived is this particular experience, this sense of being lost inside your own existence. He had a name for the process that creates it, and a name for the process that cures it. And they are in many ways the same process. What I'm going to share with you is not a quick fix. It's not 5 tips for finding yourself. It's something deeper than that, something that might change the way you understand every decision you've ever made and every feeling you've ever tried to push away. But I need you to stay with me, because the most important part of this won't come in the first few minutes. It'll come when you least expect it, the same way truth usually does. You've been carrying something and you don't talk about it. Maybe you've tried. Maybe you sat across from a friend or a partner and opened your mouth to describe what's happening inside you, and the words that came out were wrong. Flat. They didn't capture it. So you said something like, I'm just tired, or I'm figuring some things out, and you watched them nod and move on. And you felt even more alone than before. This is a particular kind of loneliness that doesn't come from being physically isolated. You could be surrounded by people who love you. You could have a full calendar, a busy social life, a phone lighting up with messages. And still there's this distance, this glass wall between you and the world that no one else seems to notice. I once spoke with a man, late 40s, successful by every measure the world uses to define success. He ran a consulting firm, had a wife who adored him, 2 kids in good schools. He came to me not because of a crisis, but because of an absence. He said, and I've never forgotten the exact words, I feel like I'm watching my own life on a screen and I can't find the remote. He wasn't depressed. His doctor had checked. He wasn't burned out, not exactly. He was something else entirely, something harder to diagnose. He was living as a character he'd created 20 years ago, and that character had worked beautifully for a long time. It got him the job, the marriage, the respect. But somewhere along the way, the character had become the only version of himself he was allowed to be, and the man underneath, the one who once loved painting, who used to write bad poetry at 2 a.m, who felt things so deeply it scared him, that man had been locked in a basement. Not killed. You can't kill that part of yourself, but locked away, silenced, fed just enough to survive but never enough to live. Jung called that character the persona. It's the mask, the social face, the version of you that you constructed, often unconsciously, to make the world feel safe. And here's what most people miss about the persona. It's not inherently bad. You needed it. When you were young and trying to figure out how to be acceptable, how to be loved, how to survive the particular dynamics of your family and your culture and your time, you built this mask with extraordinary intelligence. A child who learns to be quiet because their parents punish emotion, that child isn't weak. That child is a genius of adaptation. A teenager who learns to be funny because humor deflects attention from their insecurity, that teenager is performing an act of psychological survival. The problem is not that you built the mask. The problem is that you forgot you're wearing it. And now, years later, decades maybe, you feel lost. But you're not lost in the way you think. You're not lost because you don't have direction. You're lost because the direction you've been following belongs to someone who isn't really you. The persona has been driving the car, and some part of you, some deep, wordless, ancient part of you, has finally started screaming from the back seat. There's another layer to this, and it's the one that makes people uncomfortable, so I'm going to go there now because I think you're ready for it. Underneath the persona, underneath the mask you show the world, there lives what Jung called the shadow. The shadow is everything about you that you decided was unacceptable. Not just the dark stuff, though that's part of it. The anger you were told was inappropriate. The desire you were shamed for feeling. The ambition you were told was selfish. But also the light stuff, the things about you that were too bright, too strange, too much. Your creativity, your sensitivity, your wildness. Your longing for something you can't name. All of it pushed down, packed into the basement of your psyche, and left to ferment in the dark. Here's what nobody told you about the shadow. It doesn't just sit there quietly. It leaks. It leaks into your relationships, into your choices, into your moods. That irritation you feel when you see someone living boldly, taking risks, speaking their truth. That irritation is not about them. It's your shadow showing you what you've buried. That fascination you have with certain kinds of people, the ones who seem dangerous or magnetic or impossibly free, that's not random attraction. That's your unlived life waving at you from behind the glass. Jung once wrote, "Until you make the unconscious conscious, it will direct your life and you will call it fate." I must have read that quote 100 times before I really understood it. What he's saying, what he's really saying, is that the things you refuse to look at don't stop existing. They just start running your life from a place you can't see. You think you're making free choices. You think you're choosing your partner, your career, your habits, your reactions. But if you haven't looked into the shadow, if you haven't sat down with the parts of yourself you've been avoiding, then those choices are being made by a version of you that you don't even know exists. And you end up here, feeling lost, feeling like something is wrong but unable to name it, living a life that looks right on the outside and feels hollow on the inside. I want to tell you about a woman I encountered years ago, not in a clinical setting, but at a retreat focused on creative writing. She was in her early 30s, soft-spoken, almost painfully polite, the kind of person who apologizes for existing. She'd come to the retreat because she wanted to write but had never allowed herself to. Her mother had been an artist, a passionate, chaotic, brilliant woman who also happened to be emotionally destructive. Growing up with that mother, this woman had unconsciously made a decision she didn't even know she'd made. I will never be like her. And so she packed away everything that resembled her mother. The passion, the creativity, the intensity, the fire. She became the opposite. Controlled, quiet, safe. And it worked for a while, but by her 30s, the life she'd built felt like a cage she'd constructed with her own hands, and she couldn't figure out why. On the third day of the retreat, during a free writing exercise, something broke open. She wrote a passage so raw, so furious, so alive that she scared herself. Her hands were shaking when she put the pen down. She looked at me and said, "That's not me." And I said gently, "What if it is?" This is the crux of what Jung was pointing to with the concept of the shadow. The things we push away don't disappear. They gather force. And often the very qualities we most need to feel whole, to feel alive, to feel like ourselves, are the exact qualities we've exiled because somewhere, at some time, we learned they were dangerous. The woman at the retreat wasn't lost because she lacked direction. She was lost because she'd amputated the part of herself that carried her direction, her passion, her creative fire, and she'd done it so skillfully, so completely, that she'd forgotten it was ever there. This is what Jung called individuation, and it is the single most important concept I have ever encountered in my life. Individuation is not self-improvement. It's not about becoming a better version of who you think you are. It's about becoming who you actually are. It's the process of integrating all the parts of yourself, the light and the dark, the acceptable and the shameful, the persona and the shadow, into a coherent, authentic whole. And here's the part that surprised me when I first understood it. Individuation doesn't start when you feel strong. It starts when you feel lost. That lostness you're feeling right now, that confusion, that sense of standing in the middle of your life and not recognizing any of it, that is the beginning, not the end. Jung described it as a kind of death, a necessary death. Not of you, but of the false self you've been carrying. The persona starts to crack, and what pours through the cracks isn't weakness, it's reality. It's the real you, showing up uninvited, unwelcome, and absolutely essential. There is a line that Jung wrote in his later years that I keep returning to again and again, like a prayer. The privilege of a lifetime is to become who you truly are. Read that again in your mind. The privilege of a lifetime is to become who you truly are. Not who your parents wanted you to be. Not who your culture told you to be. Not who your fear sculpted you into. Who you truly are. And the path to that truth, paradoxically, almost cruelly, runs straight through the place you feel most lost. Now I want to turn the mirror toward you because everything I've described isn't abstract. It's living inside your daily experience right now. And I think if you're honest with yourself, you'll recognize it. Maybe for you it shows up in your relationships. You keep choosing the same kind of partner, the same dynamic, the same ending. And each time you tell yourself it was bad luck, or bad timing, or their fault. But somewhere beneath that story, there's a whisper. What if I'm the common denominator? What if I keep attracting this because something in me needs it, even as it destroys me? That's your shadow choosing your partners for you. That's an unconscious wound running the show, while your persona stands in the corner pretending everything is fine. Or maybe it shows up in your career. You chose a path that made sense, practical, respectable, stable. And now you stand inside that choice every single day, going through the motions with a competence that impresses everyone around you, and you feel absolutely nothing. No passion, no fire, just the mechanical repetition of someone doing what they're supposed to do. And every now and then, you'll see someone doing work they love, work that's messy and risky and alive, and you'll feel a sharp twist in your chest that you immediately suppress. That twist is your real self trying to breathe. Or maybe, and this one cuts deepest, it shows up when you're alone at night, when the noise stops, when the distractions fall away, when it's just you and the ceiling and the silence. And in that silence, a thought surfaces that you've been running from for longer than you'd care to admit. I don't know who I am. Not in a philosophical way. In a visceral, terrifying, ground-shifting way. The identity you've been performing has become so thick, so total, that you've lost contact with whatever was underneath it. And the scariest part isn't the not knowing. The scariest part is that some nights, some quiet, ruthless nights, you suspect there might be nothing underneath at all. I need you to hear me when I say this. There is something underneath. There is a self beneath the self you've constructed, and it is vast and strange and full of life, and it has been waiting for you with a patience you cannot comprehend. The fact that you can feel its absence is proof that it exists. You cannot miss something that was never there. If you're recognizing yourself in what I'm describing, I want you to leave one word in the comments. Awake. Not for me, for yourself. As a marker that today, right now, you acknowledged something you've been avoiding. Let it be small. Let it be quiet. But let it be real. Now that you see it, now that you've caught a glimpse of the pattern, the question becomes, what do you do with it? How do you begin the process of coming home to yourself when you've been a stranger in your own life for so long? I'm not going to give you a 5-step plan because the psyche doesn't work that way. The soul doesn't respond to spreadsheets and checklists. But there are movements, shifts in orientation that I've watched change people from the inside out. And they all begin with the same thing: the willingness to stop running. There's an old Greek myth about Orpheus descending into the underworld. You probably know the story. He goes down to retrieve his wife, Eurydice, who's been taken by death. The gods tell him he can lead her back to the world of the living, but there's one condition. He cannot turn around and look at her until they've both reached the surface. He has to walk forward, into uncertainty, trusting that what he loves is right behind him, without any proof. And, of course, at the last moment he turns. He looks back, and she vanishes forever. That myth has haunted humanity for 3,000 years because it describes something so precise about our psychology that it hurts to look at directly. The descent into your own darkness, into the shadow, into the places inside you that you've been avoiding. The descent requires a specific kind of faith. Not faith in a god or a dogma, faith in the process itself. Faith that if you walk into the unknown parts of yourself without immediately demanding answers, without constantly checking to see if it's working, without turning around because the uncertainty is too much, something will follow you out of the darkness. Something real. Something yours. The first shift is this: stop pathologizing your lostness. Stop treating it as a problem to be solved and start recognizing it as a threshold to be crossed. In every great mythology, in every spiritual tradition, the hero's transformation begins not with a triumph, but with a collapse. The Buddha left his palace. Christ went into the desert. Inanna descended to the underworld and was hung on a hook, stripped of everything. These are not stories about winning. They are stories about the necessary destruction of a false life so that a real one can begin. When you feel lost, your first instinct is to scramble back to solid ground, to fix it, to make a plan, to find a new identity to wear as quickly as possible. I'm asking you to resist that instinct, not forever, just for now. Just long enough to hear what the lostness is trying to tell you. Because it is trying to tell you something. It is saying the structure you've been living inside has become too small for who you're becoming. And the only way to build a bigger one is to let the old one fall. The second shift goes deeper, and it requires courage. Begin a relationship with your shadow. This doesn't mean wallowing in your darkness. It doesn't mean acting out every repressed impulse. It means turning toward the parts of yourself you've disowned and asking them, honestly and without judgment, what they need. Jung developed a practice he called active imagination, which is essentially a way of dialoguing with the unconscious. You sit quietly, you let an image or a feeling arise, and you engage with it. Not as its master, not as its victim, as its equal. You ask the anger what it's protecting. You ask the sadness what it remembers. You ask the part of you that wants to destroy everything what it's actually trying to build. I struggled with this for years before I understood it. The idea of talking to parts of myself felt absurd, theatrical, maybe even a little dangerous. But when I finally sat with my own shadow, when I stopped running from the versions of myself that I'd been told were unacceptable, I found something I never expected. I found grief. Not monstrous, out-of-control energy, just grief. A deep, quiet mourning for all the years I'd spent pretending to be someone I wasn't. And in that grief, there was a doorway. Not a door that opened into light and angels and instant healing. A door that opened into myself. The third shift is perhaps the most practical, and it has to do with how your body carries what your mind refuses to process. Modern neuroscience has confirmed what Jung intuited a century ago. Unprocessed psychological material doesn't just live in your thoughts. It lives in your nervous system. That chronic tension in your shoulders, that tightness in your chest when you're around certain people, that exhaustion that sleep doesn't fix, those aren't just physical symptoms. They're your body holding the feelings your persona won't allow. When your system is stuck in a constant state of low-grade fight or flight. When cortisol is flooding your system day after day because some part of you knows you're living a lie, no amount of positive thinking will fix it. You have to give the body permission to feel what it's been holding. This might mean movement, the kind that isn't about performance or fitness, but about release. It might mean sitting with the discomfort in your chest instead of reaching for your phone the moment it arises. It might mean letting yourself cry without having a reason, without justifying it, without turning it into a story. Just letting the water move. If this is landing for you, I want you to send this to someone who needs it. Not because I'm asking you to promote something. Because you know someone. You know someone who's been too quiet lately. Someone whose eyes look different than they used to. Someone who's drowning in a life that looks fine from the outside. Send them this. Not with an explanation. Just with the words, "This reminded me of you." There's a fourth shift, and it has to do with reclaiming the pieces of yourself you abandoned along the way. Think of it as an archaeological dig into your own history. Somewhere in your past, there are things you loved that you stopped loving. Not because the love died, but because someone or something convinced you it was wrong to feel it. Maybe you were a child who loved to draw, and a teacher told you that you had no talent. Maybe you were a teenager who felt things intensely, and your friends mocked you for being too sensitive. Maybe you were a young adult who had a wild, strange dream for your life, and someone practical, someone who meant well, talked you out of it. Those abandoned loves are not trivial. They are fragments of your authentic self, and they are still alive inside you, waiting. You don't have to quit your job tomorrow. You don't have to upend your life in some dramatic gesture. But you do need to start feeding the parts of yourself that have been starving. Buy the sketchbook. Write the terrible poem. Take the walk with no destination. Put on the music that moves you and let it actually move you. These are not indulgences. They are acts of psychological reclamation. And they matter more than you know. Jung once put it this way: the creation of something new is not accomplished by the intellect, but by the play instinct. What he meant is that the rational mind, the part of you that makes plans and weighs options and calculates risk, that mind is useful. But it is not the mind that heals. Healing comes through play, through creativity, through the willingness to do something that serves no practical purpose except to make you feel alive. And when you start doing this, when you begin reclaiming those lost pieces, something shifts in your nervous system. The cortisol starts to drop. The tightness in your chest loosens, not all at once, but in moments. You'll have a morning where you wake up and for the first time in months, you don't feel dread. You feel something closer to curiosity. And that curiosity, fragile as it is the first green shoot of your real life pushing through the concrete of your old one. I want to show you what this looks like on the other side. Not the imaginary other side, not some fantasy of perfection where all your problems dissolve and you become this enlightened being floating above human suffering. That's not real, and it's not what Jung was pointing to. What I want to show you is something messier, something truer. I knew a woman, a therapist actually, who went through her own version of this unraveling in her late 50s. She'd spent her entire career helping others, while meticulously avoiding her own inner work. She had the persona of the healer down to an art form, warm, present, compassionate. But beneath that mask was a woman who had never grieved her own mother's death, which had happened when she was 12. She'd simply decided, at 12 years old, that she would never be vulnerable again, and she built an entire identity, an entire career around that decision. When it finally caught up to her, it didn't come as a dramatic breakdown. It came as emptiness, a growing sense that her work meant nothing, that her relationships were performances, that she was, as she described it, a beautifully painted shell with nothing inside. Her descent took 2 years. 2 years of slowly, painfully allowing herself to feel what she'd locked away for 4 decades. There were weeks that were brutal, weeks where the grief was so old and so deep it didn't even feel like her own. It felt like something inherited, passed down, geological. But she kept going. She kept sitting with it. She wrote in journals that she burned. She painted images from her dreams that looked like storms and oceans and doorways. She let herself be terrible at things. She let herself be lost without immediately reaching for a map. And what emerged on the other side was not a different person. That's what I want you to understand. She didn't become someone new. She became someone she had always been but had never allowed herself to be. She was softer and stronger at the same time. Her work with her clients transformed, not because she learned new techniques, but because she was finally present in the room in a way she hadn't been before. She told me once, during a long conversation over tea in autumn, she said, "I used to help people from behind a wall. Now I help them from inside the same room. And when I look at my life now, it's not that everything is easy, it's that everything is real. That is what waits for you. Not ease, reality. Not the absence of struggle, but the presence of meaning inside the struggle. Not perfection, but wholeness. And there is a difference between those two things that most people never discover, because discovering it requires going to the places that scare you most." Jung wrote, in one of the most profound things anyone has ever committed to paper, "I am not what happened to me. I am what I choose to become." Sit with that for a moment. Really let it settle into your bones. You are not your trauma. You are not your parents' failures. You are not the worst thing anyone ever said about you. You are not even the best mask you ever wore. You are the one who gets to choose, right now, today, in this breath, what to do with all of it. And the choice to turn toward yourself, to stop running from your own depth, to welcome the parts of you that have been exiled. That choice is the most radical and the most loving thing you will ever do. What this looks like in daily life is quieter than you'd expect. You'll be sitting somewhere ordinary, your kitchen table, a bench in a park, the driver's seat of your car in a parking lot. And you'll notice something you haven't felt in a long time. Not euphoria, not some dramatic spiritual high. Something quieter. A sense of ground beneath your feet. A feeling that your body is your own. That your thoughts, even the dark ones, belong to you and are not enemies to be defeated, but messengers to be heard. You'll look at the people in your life and see them differently, not because they've changed, but because you're no longer projecting your unfinished business onto them. You'll feel the weight of your own history without being crushed by it. And, in certain moments, unexpected and unrepeatable, you'll feel something that can only be described as rightness. Not that everything is perfect, but that you are finally standing in the correct life. Your life. The one that was waiting for you all along, underneath the rubble of everything you thought you were supposed to be. There's a final piece of Jung's work that I want to leave you with, and it's the concept he called synchronicity. The idea that the universe, or the psyche, or whatever you want to call the thing that moves beneath the surface of events, that it arranges meaningful coincidences at exactly the moments when we're ready to receive them. I'm not talking about magic. I'm not talking about The Secret or wish fulfillment. I'm talking about something deeper and more humble than that. I'm talking about the fact that you are here right now, listening to these words, at precisely this moment in your life. That is not an accident. Something in you is ready to hear this. Something in you typed the search, or clicked the link, or let the algorithm bring you here, not by chance but by necessity. Jung once wrote, "Who looks outside, dreams. Who looks inside, awakes." And you are waking up. I want you to remember the beginning of this. I want you to go back to that moment I described. The moment when you first open your eyes in the morning, and for a few seconds you don't know who you are. That gap. That floating formless space before the identity lands, before the persona snaps into place, before the weight of your constructed life settles back onto your shoulders. I told you that gap was unsettling. And it is. But I hope you can see now that it's also something else. It's a glimpse. A tiny window into the self that exists beneath all your masks, all your roles, all your carefully managed presentations of who you think you should be. In that gap, for just a moment, you are free. Not free from responsibility. Not free from the world. Free from the lie. Free from the false self that has been suffocating the real one. Your task from this